Thanks to everyone for taking the time out of your Tuesday evening and showing up and listening. I was really happy because I guess there were a few questions. Well, there were quite a few questions that were handed out. So, really briefly, I have my background, as Tim was saying, is I raced for a number of years and I experimented a lot with my own nutrition. I have a Bachelor of Science with a major in nutrition that I got from a naturopathic school, Bastyr University in Seattle, Washington. And over the past 25 plus years, which is crazy to say. I've worked with a lot of athletes that I coach. I worked with a lot of people with food sensitivities, just trying to really understand and create a relationship with our food. And over the years, as a nutritionist and working with athletes, we have seen, I was the era where we used to stick power bars on our top tubes. And we would still be scraping power bars months off of our top tube months later. So if I had been really wise back then, I would have invested in some sort of nutrition stock because it is a multi-million dollar industry. And I kind of would love to be able to simplify some of the things that I think we have out there. Um, there's lots of great information, and we are in a world that is full of information. It's at our fingertips. Here we are tonight. People all over the province, maybe from other provinces, I don't know, but like we're here, we're coming together because of technology. And the internet provides us with an immense amount of information. However, I find sometimes it makes things even more challenging for people to understand how it works for them. So my goal tonight is customizing your nutrition based on general guidelines and baselines. As I was saying, in the time of my world, we had very few options. So it kept it simple, but it also didn't necessarily cater it to everybody's needs. And I think that's what we've realized is that there's a lot of individuality. From even a pure daily nutrition, I could have 10 different people on the same nutritional plan, and I would probably have 9 different results because we are all just very unique individuals. So taking in the individuality, which is what a lot of the questions were based on. And I really appreciated you guys taking the time. So my goal tonight is to go through a lot of those questions over this first part of our presentation and then open up the floor to if there's more questions or comments. Um, so one of the questions, first and foremost, is how do you know how many carbs per hour you should be taking? In Ironman training, you consume so much sugar during workouts. Is there any health concerns to this? Is there any health benefits of focusing on more, quote, natural foods such as bananas, dates, and gels, etc.? So I think what this question really comes down to, again, is this individual need that we all have. And there are so many factors that we need to be aware of. Typically speaking, people can ingest and take in 30 to 50% of their caloric output that they do per hour. But most of us don't know what that is. So that's great. Again, information you can find online, but how does that pertain to me as a human being? So a few factors also will contribute to this is the heat, the type of temperature, your size, the effort that you are racing at. So generally speaking, and again, I'll start with generalities here or generalizations. Generally speaking, for someone, say 150 pounds and less, I recommend them starting with 200 calories per hour, and then kind of playing and seeing what that is as a baseline. So what we need to do is create a baseline and a foundation of information. So recording and being aware of your diet is such an important part of this. So for say someone is 250 pounds or 200 pounds, I would say there's that person's going to want to start more with 250 calories per hour. And again, kind of going back and forth. One of the things I always encourage people to think about is their attitude. We love to be on our bikes, swimming, biking, and running. This particular for me, Ironman training, you really get to use your bike as the ability to kind of play more with your nutrition because it's what you spend the most time on. Most typically, people will run maybe up to 3 hours, but most people will be biking up to 6. And so it gives us the opportunity on our bikes to really explore how is our energy level? How is our attitude? I always say to people, if you get to a stop sign and you're grumpy and you're like 30 minutes from home, it's because you need to eat, because you're on your bike. You typically would not be grumpy riding your bike if you were on your bike for an hour, right? So by this time, and sometimes we get cheap in our training, and it's like, a gel, and gels aren't inexpensive anymore. Like they're sometimes $4 or $5, and you kind of think to yourself, oh, I don't need to take a gel. I'm going to be home soon. But you're getting grumpy, and you're just getting grumpier and grumpier. And that to me is just a simple sign that I need to take more nutrition, because you shouldn't be grumpy on your bike. So, maybe it's going to cost you $3 or $4. But this comes to this next kind of question I have that was asked was, for me, when you're doing your nutrition as an athlete, you want to, one, ensure that you have the energy to start your training. Two, you want to ensure that you have the energy to complete your training. And three, you want to make sure that you have the energy to recover from your training. So every time you dip into that storage and you dip into becoming sort of angry, you are really, in my opinion, reducing your ability to recover, because you're coming home and you're really behind the 8 ball. And especially after these long 4+ hour rides training for Ironman, you're definitely going to limit how well you can recover. So simple things, 2 real takeaways. If these are the only takeaways you take away from tonight, is, to me, sports nutrition is about water, salt, and sugar. Our training nutrition, which then affects our daily nutrition, is, do we have the energy to start our workout? Do I have the energy to complete the workout and allow my training to be reflective of that? And 3, do I have the ability to recover from my workout? Because then you're going to do it again the next day. And this is really important when you have, back to back workouts, back to back days. Some people are training twice a day. So when you ask yourself, how much and how many carbs per hour should you be taking, start with that baseline. I'm 150 pounds. I'm going to start with 150 calories an hour. How do I feel? I'm 200 pounds. I'm going to start with 200 calories. I have some people that go as high as 400 calories an hour. Typically, you're looking at around 80 grams of carbohydrates. Each gram has 4 calories, so you can do the math. 8 times 4 is 32, so 320 calories of carbohydrates. You add some, from a protein bar, or not a protein bar rather, but like an energy bar, there's going to be some protein in there as well as some fats. But it's just if you want to target your nutrition, you have to know how to multiply, and you have to do very, very simple math. It's tedious, it's not sexy, it's not exciting, but it's what you have to do, because now you know the basics. So know that a calorie of carbohydrates is 1 gram is 4 calories. And know that if I'm looking at getting 200 calories, you're going to need to, get approximately 50, right? So now you're just doing math. The other part of that question was, are there health concerns with having so much sugar? And I'll be honest with you, probably the biggest health concern I would have personally is the fact that you have to brush your teeth because you are in essence just having sugar all the time. So you think about a 4-hour ride, you've got your electrolyte drink, you have your gels, you have your water. We come back to those basics of water, sugar, and salt. Now suddenly you are just wrecking your teeth. So make sure first and foremost that you are brushing your teeth. The biggest part is we need to concentrate on those basics of our carbohydrates and our salt and our water, which means that our daily nutrition needs to be balanced. That's when you look at, what is my protein content? What is my fat content? How is my regular hydration? So if you have a tendency of eating a lot of processed foods on top of having all of these already highly processed foods from a training perspective, in theory, you're going to become malnourished, because you simply are not getting the vitamins and the minerals that we all need, whether or not we're training or not. but even more so, getting that balanced nutrition from you looking at colors, looking at good sources of protein, good fats, which I'll get further on more about how that helps in the recovery process. But it's really just sticking to the basics. So yeah, I think that training nutrition, I called my business Endurance, Health, and Fitness because I truly believe people can be extremely fit, but they can compromise their health at that sort of goal and desire of becoming very, very fit. And that's for me where nutrition, which creates the ability to recover and become stronger, because when you're training, your idea is to stress the body and then you give the body adequate rest so that then the body can adapt. And to me, nutrition is part of that rest. It is part of the body's way to heal, and we can use our foods that way. Um, is there any health benefits to focusing on more natural foods such as bananas, dates versus gels? From a perspective of sugar, they were going to give you sugar. They may give you some obviously other vitamins and minerals. The biggest challenge, and we'll touch on this again a little bit more later, is when you're using real foods and they're solid foods, you need to ensure that you're taking water with those solid foods. So, back in the time, peanut butter sandwiches were the best thing that we used to have. We'd cut them up, they'd get all smushed together. You'd take them out of your back pocket and you'd be like, oh, awesome, right? It's a real food. What does it have? It has every piece of bread. Typically, most, brown or white bread is going to have 250 milligrams of sodium in it. It's going to give you around 100 calories. And now you've got some carbohydrates and you put some peanut butter on, you slapped it on, you got some protein to give you some lasting power. That's why it worked. Unfortunately, the problem with it is it became this little soggy ball of grossness. And it worked from a nutritional perspective, but it didn't necessarily work so well from a convenient packaging perspective, which we can have a whole other conversation on as far as packaging and such. But that is really where the sports nutrition industry, succeeded, is it made and created these foods that are now able to sit in your back pocket for 4 or 5 hours, not get, not go bad, the poor little banana, it's this great food, but if you've ever had a banana in your back pocket for 5 hours, it's not so happy anymore. So it really comes down to, yes, you can certainly use real food, Fig Newtons. I used Mars bars at the time, Snickers bars. But again, you're looking at sugar, you're looking at water, and you're looking at salt. And all of those, it means you take a look at the nutritional label on it, and it's going to tell you what it gets. The easy thing with a gel is typically they're 100 calories, they're 25 grams of carbohydrate, and you take them with 4 to 6 ounces of water. Convenient, easy, versus a banana, which is approximately 100 calories. You have to take water with it as well, but it takes up a lot more room in your back pocket. So I think there's a time and a place for a mix and a match, which we'll also go on a little bit further. But I do think that it is beneficial to use real foods at certain times in our training, one for variety, and two for just the overall nutritional value that you're going to get more out of from a nutritional balanced vitamins and minerals and such. Yeah, I think that was that one. I'll go through them. I love the questions. They were perfect. The other thing, so the other part of it is also, which we'll get into, there was a question about isotonic gels that people were asking about and what an isotonic gel is and different types. And what this term basically means is how quickly foods are going to get absorbed into your stomach. So there was a time, again, back in the day, when we would use and I'm just going to take a name. I'm not promoting any product. It's just easier to use a name. So you had Gatorade, and you would take, if 1 scoop of Gatorade is good, well, 2 scoops of Gatorade must be better. And the problem with that is now you are affecting the how quickly and how much water you require to let it go through the gut to be absorbed into the bloodstream. So what isotonic means is that when you have a similar amount that it's basically the same as your blood, it's going to get absorbed quicker into your bloodstream, therefore limiting how much GI distress you may have. The problem with that is that you tend to not get as many calories in each serving. So any sort of electrolyte drink is typically going to be a 6 to 8% sugar solution, which means you put it into a water bottle, you're likely going to get around 100 calories or so. Well, if we've done the math and say you're out for 6 hours and now you require, 200 calories, you're going to need 1,200 calories to have available. That means you're going to be drinking 12 bottles of electrolyte drink. And I don't think you're going to do that. So again, keeping it simple and keeping it with the basics. That's why we started to add more real foods or more concentrated foods, but you still need to have hydration with these. So then they started to create what I used to call a potato in a bottle. And this is a complex carbohydrate that allows you to have up to 20%, usually 18 to 20% of this sugar solution that your body could absorb and still get in. However, you were not getting your hydration with the liquid that was in that bottle. It was in essence simply helping you to digest and become absorbed. What happened in that case is a lot of people would become dehydrated because they would be taking this drink and then maybe on top of it they would have a power bar or some sort of energy bar, and they didn't have enough water to help with the absorption, and in essence they were now getting dehydrated. So we can see how quickly our racing and our training nutrition can go sideways when we start to forget about the basics of water, sugar, and salt. So my recommendations to most people is if you're in hot weather, so I lived in Arizona for a few years and it would be like 104 degrees and I would go out for a 30-minute run and I would have to take water because basically there's no it's totally dry and arid, and I could feel myself getting dehydrated as the water was literally getting sucked out of my pores, and I would need to be drinking, but I didn't really need that much more necessarily, but I knew I needed to stay and bring my core temperature down, and that water was helping, and I would still have a little bit of an electrolyte drink in it because I knew I was perspiring. But I wasn't in need of calories because my effort wasn't so long. So typically, any sort of activity that's less than, say, 60 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes, you really just need to think about your hydration. And so 60 minutes, you're probably pretty good with just water or so. If it's super hot, you might want to add some electrolytes to that. The minute we start going over 90 minutes in our activity, we then are going to start to require to have calories. And those calories can come in the form of an electrolyte drink now with that 6 to 8% sugar solution, which will get very easily absorbed. But once we start going over like 4, 5, 6 hours, now it comes back to this convenience. How do I carry, 800 calories without, and I don't want to stop and I want to train, and I'm trying to figure out how to make this work into my race day plan. So that's when we start being aware of all of these products that are now food, but because they might look like liquid, we think that they're hydration. And we need to know that we need to have water. So once we start going over that 90-minute to 2-hour mark, your hydration, basically anything that is, say, 25 degrees and above, you're looking at 1 to 1.5 to 2 water bottles an hour of some sort of hydration. I typically start with one and then you kind of add. You go, do I need a little bit more? And if anybody has ever weighed themselves after a very long bike ride on a hot day, you lose 7 pounds. So just do the math. A pound, quote unquote, is 3,500 calories. I can guarantee you, you did not lose 25,000 calories during that bike ride. You lost water weight. So that's the simple way of realizing. And we did a ride last year in Penticton, and it was 35 degrees. It was so hot. And we all did this thing. We lost 7 pounds. And people asked me, how do I not? And I was like, I don't think you can't not necessarily, because there was really no way we could have been taking in more hydration. It was just the result of what it is we do. And this is where the post recovery starts to become so important, because now our daily nutrition has to reflect the fact that we are creating stress from our training, not just from a physical perspective, but also on a nutritional perspective, because there's really very little way that once you start to get over these 6+ hour training days and you start to deplete the body, I don't think that we can ever make it back within that time frame. And so then we really have to be aware of, what does my daily nutrition really look like? So yeah, I hope that gave some idea with the whole Ironman training and the calories, because it's big. I'm going to go on to the next question. People who struggle to tolerate processed sugar and foods, gels, carbs, electrolytes, etc., all cause GI issues. So going back to the isotonic, that whole ability to try to find something that is a little bit more like what the solution, the concentration is, so that it goes through the GI and gets absorbed easier. But what I would really suggest for people here is be really aware of how much you are drinking water to help absorb any of these foods. So if you are taking a gel, typical gels are going to give you 100 calories, and they say take this with 4 to 6 ounces of water. If you get a little lazy and you're like, I don't feel like drinking water, and you suddenly just have your gel, again, it's going to start to create this imbalance of what's happening in your GI. Suddenly, that sugar is not going to get absorbed and it's going to get stuck. And that's when GI issues happen. So whenever I hear about GI issues on bike rides or on hot days, things like that, where your likelihood of getting dehydrated is quite great, be really aware of how much water you're taking to allow yourself to absorb, how much sugar and sodium. So when we think of sodium, sodium is a crucial part in allowing our bodies to also absorb and get that through the gut into the bloodstream. So I have had people on hot days, 30+ degrees, they will take upwards of 800 milligrams of sodium an hour. And it's a lot, but again, it depends on how much have you perspired. So when it comes to sodium, I always encourage people, start with around, if it's a long training day, start with around 300 to 400 milligrams of sodium. And I get people to think a little bit, because we kind of have this negative feeling towards sodium in our daily life. Most of the people I know who are doing triathlons eat a pretty clean, healthy diet, typically not with a lot of processed foods. They often make their own foods. They're actually not getting a lot of sodium on a daily basis. So what ends up happening is that we're not only are you not getting it for when you need it in your training, but we're also not necessarily replenishing it. So if you think about eating out and you think about going to Subway and getting a foot long, it's not unusual that a foot long sub would have over 3,000 milligrams of sodium in it, which is a lot. But this is again where you take and you start to look at, what is my daily sodium? And then when I'm training, how do I ensure that I'm getting what it is I need, that I'm losing from my perspiration? So basically, we need to give our body what it is we're sweating out, what we are using for energy. And that's why salt is such an important element to our nutrition for being out there for such a long time. So start with 400 milligrams, start to play. So again, all we're doing is gathering information to be able to see how is it affecting me. If you come home, and I would challenge anybody right now, it's November. It's not my favorite month. I won't lie. It's dark. I don't know why we do that, but we do. But I don't crave potato chips in November. I also don't ride my bike for 5 hours in 25-degree weather in November. When I come home from a bike ride, I crave salty foods, which is a clear indicator to me I'm not getting enough salt during my bike ride. If you start to taste a electrolyte drink in November just cuz you can, oh, let's just make some of this up and see what it tastes like. You'll be like, oh, that's really salty. That kind of tastes gross. However, 3, 4 hours into your bike ride on a lovely hot day, it actually tastes really good. And it's almost a way for you to show how your body is needing and what your body is needing by what your taste buds are indicating. Like, I am a total black pepper and lime potato chip gal, but I only ever use them when I've done big training. Like, I don't come home and go, oh, let's have some potato chips on a daily basis. However, after a hot training day, I love it. So I think it's really important to be aware of how much salt, how much sugars we're needing, and how that combination in our gut can affect what our GI is. A lot of GI issues, they can be super complicated. And there was a question with regards to, how do we limit, how do we limit GI issues? And I'm just going to quickly touch base on this with regards to the fact that sometimes GI issues truly are a food intolerance. So there's a difference between a food sensitivity and a food allergy. And so what ends up happening sometimes, you can have, for example, an allergy to peanuts. You have peanuts, your lips, you have a histamine response. It is a response that the body is having to an allergic reaction. A food sensitivity, on the other way, and the way I like to describe it, is 100 milliliter beaker is really good at holding up to 100 milliliters. Once you get 101, it doesn't do its job anymore. It doesn't matter if you go from 99 to 150, it's not going to hold anymore. So when we look at food sensitivities, sometimes when we end up eating foods that we can tolerate for a period of time, when we eat too much of them or there's other elements of stress, it can create a food sensitivity or a GI issue. So GI issues from a pure racing training perspective, in my opinion, is going to be based off of the balance of salt, sugar, and water in your system. If you find yourself dealing with food sensitivities in training, or you're heightened after hard training efforts and things like that, that could indicate more of something like a food sensitivity, not necessarily a food allergy. So being aware, and this is where doing a diet diary. So if I had an athlete say to me, hey, I'd like to train and do an Ironman, Mel, I did one, I didn't have a great day. How can you make me faster? I could assume a whole bunch of things. Oh, they're not good swimmers. I could assume, oh, they didn't ride their bike enough. But the only way I'm going to know is by having them tell me, write stuff down, and gather information. And it's the same thing with our nutrition. Sometimes we wonder why, but we haven't kept almost a diary. We haven't kept that journal of how it is we eat. And I think it is super important, not for this, deciding something's good or bad, but just to gather that information. If I ask somebody, you went out for 4 hours on your bike ride, how many calories did you take? I would expect somebody to be able to say, oh yeah, I had 800 calories with me. I had, 300 milligrams of sodium, and I had 6 bottles of water. And then I'd be like, okay, how did that work for you? And at that point, we can then start to make changes. But if we don't know and we don't have the foundation, then making any of these changes, we don't know if what's really working. There's too many moving parts. So I really do encourage people to treat your nutrition training just like you would treat your physical training. Gather information, find out these things, understand what's a calorie, what does a gram of carbohydrate look like, what does the difference between 150 calories or 200 calories an hour. Because for a 2.5 hour event, it might not make that much of a difference, but for a 10+ hour day, that deficit could really be the difference between finishing strong at the end or not. And one of the hardest things for me to have ever watched is to watch an athlete that you really believe their training represents that they could do a 10-hour Ironman. And that person is at 12 hours, not because they physically can't do that event, but it's because their nutrition wasn't dialed in to allow them to have the energy to do it. One of the greatest things I see is that 12-hour athlete who has dialed in their nutrition and they're like dancing over the finish line because they were able to do what their training set out. They could be separated by 2 seconds, and there's such a difference in what happened on that day, primarily based on their nutrition, not on their training. And that's why your training for your nutrition for an Ironman is so very, very important. Quick question. We have a few older athletes out there, and I can say I'm one of them now, which is so fun. But are there any extra considerations for older participants working towards this type of endurance sport? Best fuel for recovery and strength building in aging athletes? Are there nutritional factors older athletes, say over 60, should be concerned about? So as athletes, as we age, probably one of the biggest things that we find from a training perspective is our muscle mass tends to decrease. So I tend to find that as athletes age, it is more important to understand how much protein one is getting and how it's getting into our system. So again, it's not necessarily for the aging athlete only, but it is an important part. We need to really focus on the recovery. I find that for most aging athletes, I hate saying that word anyway, most older athletes, it takes a little bit longer for us to warm up into our workouts. So, we start at maybe a slower pace, all these different things. But what I'd like to think is the most important thing is understanding that as our muscle mass is going to not necessarily build as quickly, it's almost more important to think about weight-bearing exercises and adding some cross-training as far as training in weights and body weights and things like that, especially as we age. From a nutritional perspective, one of the things I look at, and again, huge generalization, you have 100%, and I would say 50% of your calories start with this as carbohydrates. 30% of your calories start with that as fats, and 20% of your calories start with that as protein. And that may not make any sense to anybody, but it gives you a really basic idea of, am I getting what I need? And then you have a baseline. I'm not saying that's the way everyone should eat, because everyone will eat differently, but it's a way to go, where am I relative in my eating habits? Again, taking that diet diary and deciding, where am I getting what I need? I started this presentation saying there could be 10 people and I could give everyone the same diet and I would probably have 9 different outcomes. So there's never going to be one way of eating that's going to work for everybody, but have an idea of where you are relative to this 50, 30, 20, so that now you're able to go, what is it that I need to maybe change? Oh, maybe I'm at 20, but I don't really feel like I'm getting, I need more carbohydrates. So now you know what you can have and fluctuate with. I think it's really important to say that as we age, the inflammatory process is also greater. So we want to look at foods that have more of these anti-inflammatory properties, such as our good fats, olive oil, our avocados, fish, things like that, omega-3s. So being aware of how we can implement this. But again, I don't want to just limit it to the older athlete. I think everybody at every point in their life needs to really focus. There are a few supplements, and I'm not a huge guru on supplements. That's not really my thing. However, there is a lot of research out there, and this is where I think the rabbit hole, also known as the internet, can become very, very scary. Um, However, I think it is important to know that there's a lot of talk out there. And so probably the biggest one that most people are talking about right now is creatine. I just wanted to touch on it. Typically 2 to 5 milligrams is what people are saying they take. There's not a whole lot of side effects on it. It was also sort of what happened years ago with glucosamine. People were like, oh, everyone has to take glucosamine. This is what I tell people. Provided you don't have any medical health issues that any sort of supplement will have any negative effect with, or change or affect your medications or anything like that, try it for 30 days. And try it at the dosage that they are suggesting using, as I said, talk to your doctor. I'm not a doctor, but I do think it's important. Try it, use it at the dose that they are recommending. There's nothing worse in my mind than going, well, I'm not sure if I want to try it, so I'm just going to try it maybe once every other day, or I'm going to, you won't have a really good idea if it's working for you. And if you feel different on it, then you'll know. So that's, again, use your information and use the diet diary to record, how am I feeling? How is my training? I'm not going to say that everyone should be taking certain supplements. There's lots of good research on vitamin D in the winters. There's lots of good omega-3s. There's lots of really great things out there. But the only way you're going to know if they're working for you is by taking them, take them for a 30-day period of time and see, do I feel different? And that's the easiest way that I would talk about as an aging athlete. How are you doing? Give yourself time to feel the change. We've lived a certain life for a while. Maybe we're starting to add activity into our life. We sometimes want to have immediate results, and things don't happen immediately. So give yourself time to try things to see how they work before thinking, oh, this isn't working, that's not. And I always say to people, just buy enough to try, because sometimes they get really expensive, and sometimes we forget about the basics of what our real nutrition is, which is, once again, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. So we can go down those rabbit holes, but I think it's important to be aware that there are supplements out there, and you're going to have someone that swears by something. As long as it's healthy for you and safe for you to take based on where you are at in your health, I often say to people, as long as there's no negative side effects, and there are some supplements that have some really negative side effects, so you need to look into those and be very, very aware of those. Training nutrition, I got this one, I love, training nutrition while breastfeeding. So the biggest thing, in my opinion, that you need to be aware of is that your caloric need during this period of your life is greater. And so therefore, limiting calories, and this is, again, when we look at the basic formula of, do you have the energy to start your workout? Do you have the energy to complete your workout? Do you have the ability to recover from your workout? Now you're responsible for this little being who is also needing their requirements from you. So it is super, super important that the extra calories, the extra calcium, the extra hydration that you need in order for your body to produce, to give life to this little person, is super, super important. So I'm not an expert, I'll be honest, in women's health with regards to training and breastfeeding and things like that. But that, to me, would be the most important thing, is that you're ensuring that you're getting the calories to support another. And, it's not a negative thing. This is an added stress. So when we go back to that basic equation of stress plus rest is equal to your success or your performance, you have an added stress on your body by being this producer of breast milk, and you need to be able to ensure that you give your body the rest and the nutrients that it needs in order to do it, so that you can be a great athlete and still enjoy all those other things and motherhood. So I think it's super important. Uh, Sticking a little bit with women's health again here, there's a question that says, how does perimenopause affect the nutrition needs by athletes during this phase? Any tips or tricks? So one of the biggest challenges I find with people going through what we call perimenopause is that perimenopause is this period of huge transition, and every day is different. And so the hard part about it is I've been saying, oh, we need to gather information, keep a log, right? But now suddenly everything is changing because the hormones are not in a regular state. So what's challenging, the biggest challenge is that I find for most people, women dealing with perimenopause who are having challenges, is that something might work one day and it doesn't work the next day. And there's this element of frustration and, feeling like you're doing something wrong. So what I say to people is during this period of time, really be patient with yourself. Be patient during this transition, because that is what it is. As we move from perimenopause to menopause, there are different things also happening. And there's a lot of awareness of this whole idea of what we call cortisol and the fight and flight response. And it's related to stress. The same equation, stress plus rest is equal to our success or performance. So as a female moving through this transition, we are stressing our bodies at a period of time where there's already a heightened stress due to the demands of the hormones and the change in hormonal change. So sometimes pushing ourselves to the limit in a physical workout isn't always going to be what our body requires to kind of, monitor what this balance is between our fight and flight, this cortisol, these increased levels of the stress response versus, moving into a more parasympathetic nervous system. So it is, I always say to people, be patient with yourselves during this time. If I had the answers, I would be, I might still be talking to you because I really like talking to you, but I would be sitting in a really big house somewhere else. And I have multiple houses. But I think what's important is that there are a lot more resources for women dealing with moving through and being an athlete at this time, and working with someone with regards to how do we monitor and what is this effect of stress on our system. And I'm not saying it's only limited to women, because I also know that there are a lot of different changing hormones within men as they age as well. And I think as we move through these periods, recognizing that the stress that hormonal changes affect on our body, we do and can have mechanisms. So maybe you're scheduled to do a super hard intensity tempo run, and you just are like, I'm exhausted, I'm tired. Maybe it's more like taking a walk and allowing the heart rate to stay. Not to say you won't come back maybe 2 days later and do that same run, but from a hormonal perspective, I think it is really important. From a nutritional perspective, moving through this period, again, there's lots of controversy. There's lots of people, and there's another question about fasting and intermittent fasting. For a lot of people going through perimenopause, the idea is to eat more frequently, smaller meals. That would go totally against the idea of fasting, which works for some other people. And I think this is where we need to be aware. When our blood sugar levels are dropping and going and they're not stable, eating smaller meals more frequently can sometimes really benefit a person who is dealing with these fluctuations. Sometimes other people find it's really helpful to go, 12 hours or so. They might have their final meal at 6 p.m. at night, and they won't eat again until 6 a.m. in the morning, kind of working on that sort of fasting idea. But again, you'll only know by doing and maintaining a diet diary to give yourself information. gather that information to see how is this relatable to me, because there's so many things and each day can be very, very different. So trying to figure it out can be really difficult for sure. The stress cortisol equation plays a huge role in moving through this period, this perimenopause into menopause. And I urge you, if there are times that you feel like talking to a doctor, this would be the time. And there's so much more new medical research done as far as moving through this period. It is just a natural part of our life. And being able to be patient with ourselves at the transition is really important. Okay, question here. What to do mid-race when you feel like you can't take on any additional nutrition? So kind of dealt with this at the very beginning. This was sort of in on that same question. So my question with this, or my answer with this, is again, be aware of how much hydration you're having. If and when you cannot feel like you can take on nutrition in a race, mid-race, high intensity effort, long, think back to your top three: water, sugar, and salt. And how much have you been having too much of, or what have you been having not enough of? Because somewhere in that equation is that imbalance. Sometimes it just tastes really good to just have some whole real food to let your belly feel like it's actually digesting something as you take your effort way down. Typically, if you're having GI issues, your effort's going to reduce a little bit, and now you might be able to get back on top of it. One of the examples I tell people about long training days and racing is I was watching Ironman Coeur d'Alene many years ago. And I woke up with the athletes and I watched them take off on their swim, and I had my coffee in one hand and my muffin in the other, and oh, yay. And then I go back to the house and then I wait for them to finish the swim, and hour and a half they're, coming on onto the bike, and I'm like, oh, let's go for a little run while they start their bike ride. So we go for like a 30-minute run, and I'm like, okay, now I'm hungry and I'm having breakfast. So I'm sitting and I'm having, an eggs Benny or something like that. These guys are on their bikes, they're riding, they're out there, and I'm eating an eggs Benny. Then, they are starting to come back in, or they did a loop or whatever, and I'm cheering, yay, yay, yay. And I've got lots of energy because I'm focused on cheering and being there for my athletes. So then they come off the bike. It's around 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock or whatever. And I'm like, oh, it's time for lunch. So I go and I have a sandwich and I'm cheering them on. And then they're on the run. And, 6 o'clock comes around. It's coming up to that 11-hour mark. They got an extra hour. I was like, oh, I think I might have a little dinner while I'm waiting for them to finish. So all this while, I've had 3 meals. I've run around. I've been on my bike back and forth, but I have eaten 3 real meals and probably 2 snacks. And these people have had, 12 gels. So you can see how our daily nutrition, we don't give ourselves enough credit, I think, to realize when you're on the bike, just how much energy, when you're out there on the run, just how much energy. So when you can't eat, for whatever reason, you just feel you can't eat, go back to the basics of, how's my water? How's my hydration? How much sugar have I had? Have I had too much sugar? Do I need to balance it out? I haven't had enough sodium. I dropped my salt tablets. Be aware and do the math to figure out, because I believe that all of you and people who get to that point on race day have done the training. You're not going to show up without the training done. But what's happening is that the nutrition, for whatever reason, those 3 elements have gone really sideways. And we want to get back to the basics of those 3 elements. Talked about the fasting. If you wanted to occasionally benefit from the purported benefits of fasting, would you incorporate fasting, if at all, into the high caloric demands of training for a long distance triathlon? So, as this person wrote, it's a high caloric demand. So I'll be honest, I am not a huge believer in, if you're training for an Ironman, to really focus on using fasting as part. Traditional fasting is like a 16-hour period of time that your body is not eating. So it gives you 8 hours that you are eating. And in my opinion, when I'm working with day in and day out triathletes who are balancing work and balancing life and balancing training, you're getting up early in the morning and you're training, and then you're going to work. You might do something at noon at lunch, and then you might be doing something after work. And if you are doing an intermittent fast and doing 16 hours where you're not ingesting fuel, in my personal opinion, there's too many hours of you being active to not give yourself that opportunity. You're no longer giving yourself that opportunity to either, one, have the energy to start your workout, two, have the energy to complete the workout, and three, have the energy to actually benefit from your workout. So what I would look at more is looking at maybe, 10 or 12 hours. What is it that you're looking, or maybe change your training if that is something that's important to you. But I see so many athletes, to me, you're giving yourself the opportunity to enjoy and have the energy to do what you want to enjoy. So I know when I was training, I'd get up at 6. I was just happy I was jumping in the pool. I would always swim first thing in the morning. And I was not a big breakfast eater. It just didn't work for me. So I would train what I would have for my race day in certain workouts. But generally speaking, I was just happy to get to the pool by 6 o'clock, jump in, I'd have a coffee, and then I'd swim and I'd be out for an hour. But then I'm like, I have to eat something right away, that 30-minute window. And I did do this. You would have either a shake, you would have maybe, some muesli and yogurt in a container, and I'd be eating it in the change room. And then I'd go off. I would either go to work or I would go on to some whatever it was I was doing. And then suddenly you're like, oh, have a workout tonight at 6 o'clock. So what I recommend for people is to try to have your larger evening meal before that workout. So if your workout's at 6 o'clock, I would encourage people to have your larger meal at 3 or 4. What this does is, for a lot of people who are training for doing early morning races, it does now give you this ability to understand, what does it feel like to have something in my stomach when I'm out training and out racing. And if it doesn't work for you to do it every morning because 6 a.m. is early, but it might work for you to practice it in the afternoons before, and what foods can your body digest easily. So typically before activity, a higher intensity activity, you can typically have around 150 to 200 calories per hour pre-event. So if I'm going to go do, say it's Sunday and I get to sleep in, and I'm going to swim at 9 o'clock and I'm getting up at 7, I might be able to easily tolerate 400 calories or so, 2 pieces of toast, and some peanut butter, or maybe some oatmeal, or whatever your thing is, before I start that workout. And now I can practice my training nutrition and what it's like to eat and have something. The other way, again, as I said, is if we're training early in the morning and we're training in the evening, which I know many people do, if you're waiting until 8 or 9 o'clock to eat that final meal, sometimes that's also going to affect how we sleep. A lot of people don't sleep really well after they've eaten a lot in the later evenings. Sort of this, we often talk about this 2 to 3 hour period of trying not to eat before you go to bed. So now here you are, you come back from your evening swim workout and it's 8 o'clock. And you're going to go to bed by 9:30 necessarily. It's hard to figure it out. So I really am a believer in base your nutrition around your workouts, so that I'm going to have that ability to have the energy to do that workout. If you eat lunch at 12 and you have a 6 o'clock workout and you're not eating anything between that period of time, you're going to wonder, why aren't I performing the way I feel I can? Or maybe you're just having a bar, it's maybe 200 calories, or maybe it's just, in my opinion, it's not enough. So by having that larger meal at, say, 3 or 4 o'clock, it gives you that ability to learn how to digest, learn how to be active with food in your gut, and allow yourself to have the energy, and also give yourself that sort of 10 to 12 hour break when we're sleeping and recovering, because that's what our body does when it sleeps. It's part of that equation, stress plus rest. It's 6:57. I've talked a lot. I think I did most of the questions. Tim, do you want me to shut up?
Not at all. I could go all night, but I get it is yeah, you're right, 6:57. And there was a lot of fantastic just so many good tidbits of information in there. Really liked it. It's like if I'm finishing my ride grumpy, there's something amiss. And I know that that happens to me a lot, and I just like always have a secret little Snickers packed in my jersey pocket as well. So but thank you so much for taking the time to answer all those questions that were submitted in such great detail.